So we are on a walk of the battlefield today. Hi friends, welcome to Exploring History Together. My name is Jason. Today's Saturday, June 10th, 2023, and we are visiting a Prince William County farm that dates back to the early 19th century, although some records do speculate that it's even older. In 1711, this property was part of a tract of nearly 1,000 acres, but today, 312 years later, roughly 11 acres is what remains. Over its 200 years plus, the house has had several close brushes with complete destruction. Fire, long periods of being unoccupied, bouts of vandalism, as well as the landscape of the county itself evolving from farmland to more densely populated neighborhoods. And even though several Civil War battles were fought nearby, the house did manage to make it through the war intact. This house, known as Moor Green, was added to the National Register of Historic Places in November of 1978. This is Sandra, the current owner of Moor Green and a member of the Board of Historic Prince William. Sandra has graciously offered us a full tour today, and she will be narrating while I'll be behind the camera. Moor Green has its own family burying ground, and we will be visiting there a little bit later. David Cuff, the current president of Historic Prince William, will be meeting us there to share some of the cemetery's history. So Sandra, thank you so much for opening your home and grounds for a tour, and I'm sure the viewers are in for a treat.
Thank you, Jason, for this opportunity. This is really a delight to welcome all of you to Moor Green. 208 years since it has been built. And I have been here for 8 years, and I cannot emphasize more how fast time flies. So we'll take a tour through this flying time. Welcome.
So as we approach the front of the house here, right on the front there are signs that say the Virginia Historic Landmark and various information about the age of the house. And I noticed that that sign up there has the year 1756 on it. So Sandra, what does that allude to, if anything?
Okay, here we are in the footsteps to the house of Moor Green. And yes, this is an interesting historical detail that I took some time to research. And evidently, there was a dwelling in 1756 built on this place when the tract belonged to not to the host, but to previous owners. I'll mention them when we'll talk about the history. But there was a dwelling, and it's not clear if Moor Green was built on the foundation of that dwelling, or Moor Green was a completely separate building and there was no really dwelling in this particular spot. But there were definitely dwellings on the tract of Moor Green that at that time spanned about 1,000 acres. And there were tenants living here. So this property was inhabited, and there were tenants and there were dwellings. But how it connects to Moor Green, that's the question that we may never know.
Interesting.
So but we can take a tour inside, and I will tell a little bit about the house and what I was able to find out and share with you. Okay. So we're entering through the main entrance, and I would like to invite you into the keeping room. And that time it was keeping room because that's where people kept warm. It was the warmest room in the house. Of course, the house was heated with the fireplaces, and I tell you, this is cold. So please come in. And this is Helga, another resident of Moor Green. I am sure she will be appearing in the videos.
She is making.
So now I would like to welcome everyone to the keeping room at the Moor Green. This is where we're standing now. This would be the family room where everyone kept warm in the cold winter days. And this is where I will tell a little bit of a story about the house and about its owners and what happened here. And when we look at history, there is always a reason we want to look back. Maybe we want to understand better ourselves. Maybe we want to find how we can be better in the future. But we will see all good and bad of what happened here. And some of it, like a skeleton and a human, are solid facts that we have from deeds, from tax records that are all right here on the table. And some of it more of an oral history, sometimes filling the blanks, interpretation, and I will tell you what is what, so you can go between the historical facts and the interpretation of history. So as I have mentioned outside, the house is dated, or the tract is dated to 1750s, and possibly there was a house here. Possibly it was a log cabin. It's not established that this house is standing on that foundation, but there were renters living here, and I have their names written down. There were 3 tenants. One was John Delgar, William Davis, and Meredith Moss. And it's quite interesting to see that there was a single woman being a tenant at that time here in Virginia, and that will be between 1777 and 1793. There are many angles one can take telling the story of Moor Green. It was established as a plantation. It can be a story of people who worked the land there and were enslaved and brought here. It can be the story of the family that was struggling to put ends together and was selling land to pay taxes and tried to recover the property after the Civil War and start operation, and went through many losses of family members. We'll talk more of that. And another story can be a story of the women who lived here. And this is probably mostly the angle I will take, because the one of the persons who lived here her entire life will be Jane Hoe, and I'll talk more about her. She was born here and she died here, and there's an entire period that can be defined by her. But now let's return to the beginning of the house. It was built in 1815. Actually, the property was purchased in 1793 by Howard Hoe, and somewhere around 1815 it's believed he started the construction of the house. Howard was very active in Dumfries, and his job was inspector of tobacco. He also had a mill, and later you can see the millstone in the yard. His wealth came from milling and from his involvement with tobacco. Eventually he bought this property ahead of time when he learned that Brentsville would become a capital of Prince William. So he somehow knew through his connections, he knew that the property value will increase. Well, many of us trying to do the same today. And he was able to purchase this property and started construction of the house right when Brentsville was declared to be the capital. Hoe had 5 children, 3 of which moved out west. So we probably will not cover their story, but actually I would like to know that descendants of the family out west have contacted me and wanted to come and visit the cemetery, are quite excited that these memories have been preserved and there is a cemetery they can visit. Howard Hoe had 2 children who continued to reside with him in this house, and that was his son, James Hoe, and his daughter, Jane Hoe. Howard lived here about 15 years when he passed away, and he inherited the property through his son, James. So James took over the operation of the plantation. It seemed like things were going quite well, and then he fallen sick. He was sick for some time, so he prepared a detailed will. In the will, the property passed to his sister Jane, and try to see the date, in I believe in 1838, this is when he died, and both his father and him most likely buried in the cemeteries that we will visit later. The property was transferred to Jane, who was quite young then and definitely not experienced in managing plantations. So we can only imagine the state of Jane when she realized that it's just her here, that her other 3 siblings are gone without much communication out west, her parents are dead, and her brother is dead. So what happens to Jane is probably does not raise any surprises. She gets married. She gets married to John Reed. The date of marriage determined to be around 1840, and you can see the Reed on the table. So we're moving now from Hoe to the period of Reeds. It does look like Jane and Reed had a fairly good time They had 2 children. The plantation was doing great. Their first child, Richard, was born in 39. And their second child was born in 47. And that's when story starts turning dark. Jane is pregnant in 47. And this is when her husband John dies. It's not clear did he see his second son or the son was born after his death. We don't have the exact dates of his month and date of his birth, but he basically dies somewhere around the birth of his son. So John is gone, his son John Jr. comes to this world, and Jane again left with 2 small children and the plantation to run. She takes over the management, and I think during that period, from the records and taxation and income streams and sales, things are going fairly well. In 1853, she puts plantation in a trust for her children, and she marries someone called Redmond Foster. So this is the next period. He made it on the table, even so that in all historical documents, the plantation is listed after Jane, and she is the landlord of Moor Green. So here we have some interesting questions to answer. So we are in 1800s. Jane is a widow. She has 2 small children. She is much older than Redmond, by around probably 10 or maybe more years, around 10 definitely. She puts all of her assets into a trust, so she's not sharing anything. Why would Redmond marry Jane? What was the attraction? You start right away imagining great love story. Well, they were neighbors. They probably seen each other often. And Redmond came from south. I don't quite recall it was Kentucky or Tennessee, but he moved here from south, where his father passed away and left him pretty much penniless. He squandered all of his money. But his uncle was doing quite great. And he was owner of the Foston plantation that was adjacent to Moor Green. So he came to join his uncle, and the uncle, who evidently disliked his brother, said that if he changes his name to Redmond, what was his name, he will basically will the estate to him, and he will become the owner of Foston. So he changes his name to Redmond immediately, settles at Foston, meets Jane, marries Jane, moves at Moor Green, and I think few years in 55, this is when Elizabeth is born, Elizabeth Foster. And this is where things starting to get very complicated. Elizabeth is born and she lives only 1 year and 6 months. She dies from dysentery. That's what been recorded by her father in the death certificate. After that, Jane and Redmond don't have any children. When you look at the time, you would think it's highly unlikely not to have any children without birth control. So that's the first hint that something is happening. Then we're moving away from the skeleton of facts and we're going to the oral history. There was a quite extensive oral history taken of from the freed slaves in 20s and 30s who were interviewed about the life on plantations. So it is extremely valuable resource. Of course, it can be embellished, it can be exaggerated, but in every story there is a grain of truth.
Sure.
So there's something that we can also take from those oral traditions and put it on top of the skeleton to build somebody around this story of Jane and Redmond. Redmond is mentioned by everyone as to be a very cruel and very aggressive man. So he has a temper. He is not kind to people. He is very prominent, but he is not kind to people on the plantation. And there is one quote that stayed with me where one of the interviewees mentions that he would always say, "Bury me standing, so I could see slaves working." So that, I think, defines the whole attitude of Redmond and his character and personality. So the first dark story that emerges from the oral histories is that Redmond had a child with a slave woman, and the child was born deformed. So Redmond cannot accept that, and he kills the child. Again, whether it's true or the myth, we will never know, but that's what's been recorded through oral tradition. Then things take even a darker turn. One of the interviews states that Elizabeth, daughter of Jane and Redmond, was born black, and that Redmond burned her in the fireplace. Again, this is the oral tradition. Is there truth to that or not? We don't know, but it definitely hints to the norms of the days that were hard for us to comprehend. So if we want to see what inhumanity is, we can look at the past. There was a question asked, what did Jane think of all Redmond's doings at the plantation? Did she had an opinion on this? And the person who was interviewed said, at that time, women were treated worse than slaves. She could not have an opinion. No, there was not opinion. But again, at the same time, I would like to highlight the fact that Jane was able to put Moor Green in a trust for her children, that there were legal instruments that were allowing women to preserve their wealth and pass it on to their descendants. So that's quite remarkable, because even today, in many countries of the world, women don't inherit land. Jane kept the land and she willed it to her children. As things progress with life with Redmond, she is making more and more arrangements to safeguard Moor Green from his influence. She makes sure that all furnishing, all possessions of the Moor Green are transferred to her children. Redmond has no claims on anything. Furthermore, she makes sure that any debts or any liabilities encountered by Redmond are not passed on the Moor Green, that there is complete separation. So that also tells that Redmond's spending was not in line, and she was fearing that he will squander the Moor Green. Another interesting fact that's happening in parallel is Redmond is selling Foston. So he's selling all the land, he's selling all the property. He does need to pay some debt. He does have debt. So this is sort of the beginning of his financial demise, if we can suggest so. At that time, the Foston was inherited by the wife of his uncle, Margaret Foster. And here the story becomes interesting as well, because right now in my hands I am holding letters of Margaret. You can see them here, written in a very perfect and beautiful handwriting. And these are the letters she wrote at Moor Green, and it says, Moor Green, written in Moor Green, July, we don't know which year. She did not think year as significant because everybody knew which year it was. Little she knew that her letters will be read 200 plus years later. So her letters are to her friend Margaret Payton, who resides in Salem, Virginia. And in this letter, she very eloquently recalls her childhood, her time with her friend, curiosity about life. There is one very beautiful passage in her letters where she says, do you remember, Margaret, how we ran up the Shenandoah mountain? And our skirts were all tucked on the way and it would prevent us from running. It was so hot and we felt like stripping them off to reach the peak so we could see the world. We could see what is out there. So you could see that very human curiosity about what the world is. What does it look like? And playfulness in these letters. They're also very well written, very educated, in a way philosophical about life and her memories. And she repeatedly mentions some misfortunate events. She never names the misfortunate events, but those misfortunate events kept her at Moor Green. So she does state that she does not really have possibility to leave, and those misfortunate events confined her to be here. The other hint at the misfortunate events appears in the tax record. When we look at what Moor Green was taxed on, it was taxed on cattle, on horses, on slaves, on property, on land, and everyone was listed according to their status of taxation, how capable you were. And there is a name of Margaret, who is listed as an idiot. So she's clearly mentally incapacitated. That's completely not clear in the letters. In the letters, she's extremely bright and educated, but she is mentally incapacitated. She resides at Moor Green. She forfeits her ownership of Foston, and Foston is being sold by Redmond to pay the debt. So that raises lots of questions. Again, we cannot make the facts, but it does raises lots of questions, as Redmond is clearly at conflict of interest here.
Absolutely. I have read that idiot was technically a medical diagnosis back in that day.
Yes.
Strange now.
Yeah. So now we're coming to the time of the Civil War. During Civil War, Moor Green became a hospital for both armies. From what I have discussed with historians, they say that owners were seldom asked, would it be a hospital and for which army. Decisions were made for them, and if the house wasn't burned, they were blessed with that. So the house becomes a hospital. Most likely operating room was in the dining room. Some neighbors that I personally spoke to said that before house was rebuilt, when it was still abandoned, they did witness blood stains on the walls. Again, whether true or not, that's part of the oral history. The recovery room was in the attic, and yes, there are blood stains on the floor there. They're now carpeted, but they are photographed. That definitely the wounded soldiers were recovering or not recovering there. There was research done by the Smithsonian of the cemeteries at Moor Green, and unfortunately they did not locate a mass grave of the Civil War soldiers. One would assume there should be one. That would be logical. It would be naive to assume that nobody died in the hospital, but it's not clear where it's located. Most likely it will be near the family cemetery that we will visit later. So after the Civil War, the house survives. After the Civil War, actually Richard, the oldest son of Jane, joins the Confederate Army, and he serves in the, let me tell you exactly in which division. He serves in the 89th Cavalry Regiment of Virginia Militia. He is imprisoned at Mechanicsville, Virginia. He serves in the army until '64. After the Civil War, he moves down south. He does come to visit, but not that frequently. The youngest son, John, becomes clerk in the Brentsville store, so he works there. And Jane and Redmond rebuild the farm at Moor Green and continue with the farming mostly of corn and sheep. So it was winter of 1885, where Jane's sons, both Richard and John, die within a month of each other. The cause of death, quite mysterious diseases of the time. So Richard had softening of the brain, and John had consumption. But both die within a month. At this point, Jane had to redo her will, because the Moor Green was in the trust to her sons. Now both sons are dead, also buried at Moor Green Cemetery. So she still does not rewrite her will to benefit Redmond. She wills Moor Green to Mary Steele, a distant relative, I believe a niece, who is residing in Kentucky. Jane does not live long after. She dies in 1893, at which point Redmond succeeds her. He remains in the house. The will provides for him to remain at Moor Green until his death, but preparations are made by Mary to come and claim her estate. Literally, as Mary is packing her bags to come to Virginia, she dies. There was a backup plan. It goes to another female relative of Jane, also residing down south, who also dies. So there is literally a series of misfortunate events. Eventually, the house goes to Fletchers and Thorntons, that somehow connected to the family, but at this point, the history of the Halls and Jane here ends. Redmond moves to Manassas. He lives with the judge as he is becoming quite feeble and sick. Something interesting about the Redmond's will, he willed some cash that he had remaining, not much, but there was some cash remaining, and he willed it to about 10 ladies of Manassas. It's not clear who these ladies are. Once I asked historians, was it a common practice of the time just to will cash to random ladies? They said absolutely not, and smiled. So we don't know who these ladies were and why they inherited Redmond's leftover cash after all of his spending, taxes, and debts. But that's how the story of Redmond Foster ends here. The lighter story that takes place here is during the time of the shoemakers. Shoemakers moved here in 1920s, and it is a husband and wife who never had children, and they get contacted by their nephew who had 5 kids and was working as a policeman in Washington DC, and who asks their help to take one of his children because his wife died and he cannot care and work for them at the same time. He was trying to arrange some place to stay for each of his children, knowing that none of the families will take over all of them, as now we're talking about the times of Great Depression. Everybody is trying to make their ends meet. Right. Shoemakers say we will take all or none, and all 5 kids arrive at Moor Green. They are raised here, they have kids here, they've built a secondary dwelling for the kids, and eventually they moved down south, but it was a very happy time of great generosity, love and care that took place here. Actually, I had a chance to meet the grandson of shoemakers, who also was here as a young boy and remembers somewhat what the house looked like. I would like to invite you to look at the pictures now, and we will take a picture first at Richard. This is his picture from the Civil War archives. So this is Richard Reed, Jane's son.
Okay.
So now we will look at the shoemakers. So those are the shoemakers and the 5 kids that are holding some bunnies or puppies or something interesting. And then them growing up and their kids. So now I would like to invite you to the dining room. And there are these precarious steps that supposedly went all the way to the bedroom, but I'm not sure on that construction. So in the dining room, one of the highlights is the hard pine floors that are original. Hard pine now is extinct, and if the floors will have to be repaired, it will have to come from some other house from the period. So this is the room where most likely there was the Civil War operating room.
Is that more green there?
No, this is Liberia. So this.
Oh, okay. I've been there. Yep.
You can see the houses were of very similar construction.
Oh, stone. That's the stone house. You recognize the well out front.
Uh-huh.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Did you tell me that fireplace was original?
Yes, the fireplace is original, and it is a woodwork by the Indians who were residing nearby, supposedly somewhere by the creek. So they did lots of carpentry. So now we're in the main hallway. As you can see, it was not that grand, but it's still 3 flights of stairs, and the view from upstairs is quite beautiful. And now we will go into the formal room. This room, unfortunately, is not does not have original floors or original fireplace. There was a fire set by the kids when the house was abandoned in 1984, and the woodwork and the floors have burned down.
So all that was replaced. All replica.
Yes, it's all replica, but there were pictures of the originals. And I would like also to show you this jar of treasures. This is the ceramic that I found in the grounds of Moor Green.
It's a horseshoe, various pieces of ceramic, pots, jars, plates.
beautiful piano there.
Yes, it's a Knabe from 1920s, built in Baltimore. One of the first American pianos.
Keep it in good shape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a beautiful instrument. So now we'll step upstairs, and you can see the beautiful view of the staircase.
And all of this molding here is original.
Yes, all the molding is
Look at that.
original. Beautiful.
200 plus years old.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So that was the formal bedroom. Fireplace again, and the floors are original.
Nice. And look at these crazy light switches. Look at that.
Yes, they give me lots of pain trying to guess. And this would be the children's room.
Which is a library now. And this flooring is original as
Yes,
well.
yes, fireplace as well. It's a beautiful fireplace. It's really a beautiful work. Now we're coming to the third floor, where there was an attic and where there was the recovery room for the Civil War soldiers.
So this has all been modernized up here.
Yeah, the bedroom's modernized, but you can see this beautiful flight of stairs from here. It's quite a view.
Long way down.
Mm-hmm. Now we have one last site, and that's the basement. So now we're in the basement. The basement has a full functioning fireplace. It's a fairly small room. The door was not here, so it would be quite dark. There was just a little opening for the stairs. And according to the historical records, before the dwellings were built at Moor Green, this is where the enslaved people were kept by the host, in this room, because there were no other dwellings. Not clear how many people this would be. My guess, not more than 5 at that time, but that would be the room. So this is you just stand here and you feel it. It's dark, it's humid.
That is a big fireplace too. I'm
Yes.
sure probably a lot of cooking up.
Lots of cooking here. And probably some storytelling, some singing. So we should not only think of the sad times. I'm sure they had lots of. There's actually a fascinating book called the back of the Big House, on how they've had all the communities in all the neighboring plantations and the trails, how they would visit each other, and all the celebrations of life that took place despite the misery that were put into. So this would be the room, and there is a cemetery. It's not on the property of Moor Green, but it is further away, and you can still see the tombstones. Actually, there is one story that I want to tell that was recorded by the Smithsonian, that there was a young boy who was very treasured by the family. He was very loved by Jane and very treasured by all by the boys and the rest. He was playing a fiddle. He was a fiddle player, and he died. So when he was buried, they put the fiddle into the tree that they planted on his grave. And when the archaeologists came here, they found the fiddle.
Really?
It was the remnants of the fiddle were there.
Wow.
So those small little touches that bring us closer to the people who lived at that time.
Yeah, I realize you're looking at this on a video camera, but just kind of being in here, it just evokes feelings. It really does.
And here you can see the millstone. It's hiding there in the garden. So this is supposedly the millstone from Howard's House Mill that made him some money to purchase the tract and build Moor Green.
Strange how a rock can make someone wealthy, but there you go. That's what that's for.
Right now we're standing at Moor Green Cemetery. We have David with us, who is the president of Historic Prince William, and he will tell us a little bit about the graves.
Thank you, Sandra. Yes, I'm David with Historic Prince William. We focus mostly on local history in Prince William County, and we do a lot of cemetery restoration stuff. We actually maintain the cemetery. This is a pretty standard, poor family cemetery that was used, 150 years ago or so. Things you can tell from the cemeteries is usually the graves are east-west orientation. The head will be on the west side, and the feet will be on the east side. And there'll be usually a depression between, and these are field stones, there's no markings on them. They're just natural stones that are found on the property most likely, and they're put in place. But you can see they're put in a unnatural, stance, so to make them stand out. And there are a couple of depressions here, and we think there's about 9 graves here, maybe 12 or so, but probably 9-ish. We just don't know because nothing's marked. So, but we do have an idea from history and documentation, like from wills and death certificates, death notices that were published, stuff like that. So, and there's Helga running around. Helga, stay here. And since this cemetery is so old, there are a few trees here that, many, many decades ago, these trees were small. But now they have gotten bigger, of course. And you can see how this is a stone here, and there's one on the other side, most likely. And they just kind of get pushed around a little bit. And another thing, this was probably not fenced for a long time, and there were livestock and farm animals on the property, so they may have caused some damage. We see that a lot with small farm cemeteries. A lot of times it's not damage caused by humans, it's caused by cows.
Was there ever is it known if there were any marked stones in here at any time?
As far as I know, there was no marked stones in here at any time. Yeah. Which is unfortunate. It just depends on the time frame, and I guess if they wanted to pay for a stone and wanted to wait for it. There were stone carvers in the area. There was C.L. Neal in Alexandria, starting in the right after the Civil War, probably. Well, he started actually earlier. He started in the 1830s, I believe. But then he passed away, and then so he was very active. So they could have gotten a stone carved if they wanted to pay for it, for sure. Because it's not in a row with the others. It's kind of just there. So again, it's hard to tell with all this time passed. So.
And now we're back to 21st century. Today at Moor Green there is a farm again. Moor Green is a boarding facility for these beautiful horses. And also emus, they are peeking at you right now. They are producing beautiful green eggs and home to Helga the farm dog. So thank you for visiting, and I was very happy to share my home that I love so much with all of you.
I want to say thank you for opening your home, your grounds, and we appreciate it a lot. So hopefully people will watch this and enjoy it as much as I did. Thank you very much.
Thank you.